In the spotlight tonight, we talked to Sima Samar. She was Afghanistan's first Minister of Women's Affairs after the fall of the Taliban in 2002. And she has dedicated her life before and since to advocate for women and girls in that country. Samar has just come out with a new memoir. Dr. Sima Samar joins me now in studio. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
I was just reading about your life. It is quite an incredible story. And I want to start with a quote from your book. In it, you say, "I have 3 strikes against me. I'm a woman, I speak out for women, and I'm Hazara, the most persecuted ethnic group in Afghanistan." How have those 3 things affected your life?
Well, I'm coming from a country where the most dangerous country for women to be a woman. So that's why to be a woman and then to be outspoken about women's rights, and also to be coming from an ethnic group which is persecuted in the country for so many years, it is 3 big difficulties to have and to be in that country. So that is was one of the problems, because I think it's patriarchal society everywhere, but Afghanistan is more dominated by male, and it's more war made people more conservative and look at or treat women as inferior part of the population.
So why, in the face of all of that, do you think that you have been so driven to fight for women's rights?
Well, I just wanted to fight for equality in the country, not only for women, but equality for everybody, but particularly for women. And I do believe that if we do not really treat women equally, we will not achieve sustainable peace, we will not achieve development, we will not achieve a better life within the country. So that is clear. That is why I decided to fight for women's rights and equality in my country, for human rights of all people, not only for the women, not only for the Hazaras, for everyone.
We'll talk a bit about your background, but I'm interested to know where you think we are right now in that fight for equality.
Well, unfortunately, we had a lot of achievement in the last 20 years when the NATO forces were in Afghanistan, and most of the people were supportive of human rights. But unfortunately, with the political deal which was done by the American and the Taliban in February 2020, and then with the Taliban to take over the country in August 2021, unfortunately we lost most of it, because we fought for changing the legislation, including the constitution. For first time we had equal rights in the constitution in Afghanistan for everyone.
We all remember those images of the plane leaving the tarmac and people running after it. What went through your mind when the United States decided to leave?
Well, I think it is difficult for any human being. It was people running from the Taliban and from the aggression, from the violence that they knew from Taliban, because in the last 20 years with the presence of NATO forces in Afghanistan, they were fighting and they were committing suicide attacks and so on. They were taking people hostage. So it was, and the people knew, and some of the people saw their first government. So they were running from the aggression, from the violence, from the in order to be safe. But I cannot forget that image. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the situation, particularly if you put yourself in the shoe of the mother of the one who fall from the plane as a piece of fabric, that is not forgettable. And that should not be forgotten, actually, by anyone, because it's a human, it is not a piece of fabric. It's not a piece of paper.
So where do you lay blame for how that collapse played out?
Well, I think on everyone, it's a collective failure, I would say. It's a failure of Afghan people, Afghan government particularly, Afghan leadership, and also on the international community and UN, because we were all in that path, in that trip together, and we all failed, unfortunately.
We all failed. When you compare the Afghanistan that you grew up in to the Afghanistan today, what do you see?
It's a big difference because I went to co-education school 60 years ago. Imagine that my grandchild will not be able to go to school to continue their education above 6th grade. And I gone to co-education in the university. I studied over there and I become a medical doctor. But my, let's say my other sisters who are living, the young generation of Afghanistan, are not able to continue their education and not be able to go to university. It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, and you saw different times when there was a light. And I know that your son had told you, actually you got a phone call because you were in Vancouver, I think it was at the time, when you found out that you were going to be in cabinet. Tell me that story.
Yes.
And the optimism that you had at that point.
Well, yes, I was in Canada because I was receiving the John Humphrey Award in Montreal, and I received that. Then there was a country tour, kind of public speeches. So we were in Vancouver. We were supposed to go to Edmonton, and I received a telephone call from my son and said that I'm in the cabinet. And I said, because we had an early morning flight, and I thought that it is the reception who wake up call. On that time, the iPhone and all these were not existing.
Yes.
So, and he said, "You are in the cabinet," and I said, "Who's saying?" He said, "BBC and CNN." I was so hopeful that I'll be part of the new Afghanistan, and then democratic Afghanistan, where people could exercise their basic human rights and freedom in the country.
And has that optimism faded?
No, I have to say that we achieved a lot in the last 20 years with a lot of sacrifices. But I mean, the Ministry of Women's Affairs that I established with so many difficulties and continued until the collapse is turned by Taliban to be a Ministry of Vice and Virtue. And the main job is to control women. To control women. To have edict and different statements and regulation in order to control women's freedom and rights. But I think what I say that it's not completely lost is that the people do know about their rights. And I think they cannot take the knowledge from the people. But if it's more aggression, if it's more the continuation of such a regime or such a governance, it will be a danger that the people turn to be forgetting all those things. That's why I think it's a responsibility of all of us to promote human rights in Afghanistan.
Your work running clinics in schools for women and girls eventually led you to clash directly with the Taliban. Tell me about that and how terrifying that experience was for you at the time.
Yeah, I think it's, I believe that education is a stronger tool to fight against the ignorance, to fight against the conservative misuse of religion and culture in any country, not only in Afghanistan, but in Afghanistan that will be the strongest tool. That's why I started to open school for the refugee children and also in Afghanistan for boys and girls. And then because the people see their immediate need, which is their health issue, so I started the health, particularly for women, because women in the refugee camps and also in the refugee setup, they didn't have a lot of access to basic health services, particularly for reproductive rights and reproductive health. And I believe that their access to reproductive health is key, and it's not an issue of women, it's an issue of society, and it's a public health. So that's why I started to build clinic, and particularly for women who were young and under reproductive age, in order to have access to possibilities
And tell me what the reaction was at that point in time from the Taliban.
Well, on that time when I started the clinic and the schools, the Taliban were not there actually. We had the Mujahideen and the different other groups. I mean, they were not very happy either, but also somehow they were happy because I was dealing with all the female refugees and women and children in the country. But they were not happy with the schools, so they were, unfortunately, very negative reaction sometimes. But they were also bringing their wives and family members to the clinic, so that was different kind of a reaction by different people. But in general, they didn't like women to be active. They didn't like women to be outspoken.
It's a threat?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, it was. And it was not only by the Afghan refugees, but also by the Pakistani police.
Your memoir gives us a first-hand look at Afghanistan's patriarchal society from a woman's perspective. What kinds of conversations are you hoping that this book starts?
I think it's, of course, it's a very small amount of my life and my difficulties, because you cannot put everything in the book. But I hope that the people read it and understand that Afghanistan doesn't brought up like this. I mean, it was not the Afghan people who born conservative. It's the conflict and also the game within the different superpower made the Afghans so conservative. I also would say that because of ignoring education, a proper education to Afghan children, they made the Taliban.
I wonder if you could tell me, you know, for folks watching this in Canada, it is difficult to think about what it is to be a woman right now in Afghanistan. Describe that to me. What does it mean to be a woman right now in Afghanistan? What are you facing?
Well, I think practically Afghanistan is a prison, an open prison for women, because they cannot get education, they cannot get out of the house and work, they cannot travel alone. They cannot go to park, cannot walk, because at the beginning they said the park could be a few days for women, specifically in a week, and then a few days for men. And then at the end, after a few weeks, they said, no, women cannot go to the park. Women cannot go to the public bath because the people, unfortunately, because of poverty and so on, we don't have hot water in our houses, so they were using the public bath because it's cheaper for them to go and wash themselves over there. They cannot even go to that public bath. So they cannot drive, they cannot work. So imagine it's practically a prison, because they cannot work on the NGOs, even on the humanitarian, because after the collapse of the government, it was really a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. And they even stopped women to work for the UN and humanitarian relief NGOs, because having women in those NGOs facilitate the women access to humanitarian relief programs. But unfortunately, even they were stopped to do that. So what can you describe that? It's a gender apartheid, and it's open prison for...
It's gender apartheid.
Yeah, exactly. Because they are practically erased from social life.
So what do you want to see from the international community to help restore democracy in Afghanistan?
Well, I think, first of all, they have to learn from their mistakes in Afghanistan. Not only the Afghans, but also everybody who were involved in Afghanistan. Secondly, I think they have to put the people and human rights in the center of the policies, not only their political game and political gain in their own countries, because it's also belonged to, it had an impact when there was an election in different countries, their relationship and their action in Afghanistan. And thirdly, I think focus on a quality education, and remember that it's a human responsibility.
Do you think that there will be a day in the future where there is another women's affairs minister in Afghanistan?
Yes, I think so, because I keep saying that no matter how dark is the night, we will have the sun and dawn next day. And that will be in Afghanistan as well.
Doctor, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.